curious because you have mentioned that from 2010 to 2015, our standing in this is sort of improved. But this is also the time when we had these issues about the pork barrel fund, right? And
Yes.
the Yolanda funds, right?
That's right,
Yeah.
that's
So
right.
how do you reconcile that?
2015, no? Nag-improve tayo. Interesting. I think it was happening alongside each other efforts. And it could be that at the international level, or at least those stakeholders that are being interviewed, they appreciated more the anti-corruption efforts. Remember that the in terms of communication, the previous administration was really running under a platform of anti-corruption. So it probably helped in terms of perception that you have that. But you could see that what was affected by those corruption cases that you're mentioning, or allegations that you're mentioning, such as the Yolanda Fund, which recently actually some important clarity has been provided on that, and also in terms of the DAP. If you look at it, it was more, it affected more the elections.
Yes.
So that's, you could say that this is partly a cases that were used by the incumbent to question the credibility of the previous administration. But whether it actually affected the indices, not yet. So it could actually be the one that is affecting the 2016, 2017. We don't know, because I'm not also sure if those who are of those being interviewed, they're actually particular about the leadership or the administration, or there could be other considerations as well.
All right. So now let's talk about reforms,
Yes.
to make sure that we have some sort of hope and
Yes.
positivity in our discussion. So GWatch has been involved, no, in all of this action research so that we will have evidence-based decisions, no, and reforms. So can you elaborate on the reforms that we need to do and institutionalize so that we can gradually eradicate corruption?
Several points. I think one thing that we need to look into in the fight against corruption is to broaden how we understand it. So the explanation I provided earlier, where politics, culture, society are integral part of it, has to be factored in, because just doing piecemeal interventions or reforms here and there, and very technocratic approaches that only involve, say, procedures and regulations, controls within government, they'll probably work at a given period, but they wouldn't be able to solve a problem that is already systemic and cultural. Which means if you fight corruption, maybe the better way is really you are also tackling the question of political reform. You're also tackling the question of democratization, which means involving, making governance more inclusive, making people part of it, because as we explained earlier, trust is a big factor here. And also so that the accountability and justice system works, there should be confidence and trust of the public. And one way really is to involve them, right? to show that they have stake. But even if it will, such participation will just be token if you also do not eventually really diffuse power. If there is eventually, people would still feel that, okay, we are being involved, but it's still, well, how many families that are basically controlling our lives, making the biggest decisions of this country. If that's a state of affair in the Philippines, it will really be very difficult to fight corruption. So I guess one point there is to broaden. Most of the corruption efforts that we have are very much really policy oriented, like laws, regulations, controls. You shouldn't do this, so how government officials should behave, how much they should be getting, all this that are very small scale, that is also very regulating and controlling, but it doesn't really tackle the bigger question. So, but there are related efforts that are being done to deepen democracy and also to introduce political reform, which we should take as part of that fight against corruption. Because, for example, some electoral reforms as well that would enable us to get out of money politics, which is fueling this cycle of corruption and corrupt officials getting elected to power and feeding patronage. I think electoral reforms are very crucial, and there has been a lot of debate. But the question is, okay, it's very clear that you need this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 electoral reforms, such as, for example, one specific electoral reform, which should have been easy, is how do you simplify the elections? We're electing, at any given election, we are supposed to study about hundreds of candidates for about 30 to 35 positions. Even the most intelligent Filipino and the most civic-oriented Filipino could probably not study all those candidates and consider them for any post. So simplifying the elections would be one specific electoral reform. But if you propose, and the fight for electoral reform has been there for a very long time as well, and we've been also engaged in that because we know that it's part of our fight against corruption. If you propose it to the Congress, which is composed of people who got there because of money politics, definitely they wouldn't support any reforms of your elections. And as I mentioned, we've been doing that for a very long time, and there hasn't been any reforms and changes substantively in our electoral system and electoral processes. So that's another challenge. So in GWatch, we are studying different advocacy strategies and approaches that work not only in the Philippines but in other countries. We have been able to successfully pass legislations that are that are not acceptable to the powers that be. So the highly contested policies, such as, for example, agrarian reform, reproductive health, which been contested by powerful interests. But we've been successful in passing those policies. So we are studying different strategies. So one of the strategies we're studying is what we call sandwich strategies, or it's translated in the Philippines, it's bibingka, where efforts on the ground, so mobilization of people who are supportive of the policies, would coordinate with policymakers at the top, who would actually create that fire and support at the top. This could be legislators, this could be bureaucrats, who would be supportive of the policy, and along with the mobilization from below, enabling specific reforms to happen. How does that happen in electoral reform, or how does that happen in anti-corruption? So those are questions. We have also passed these policies through another approach. We're looking into what we call, these are very technical, but this basically is movement building. So organizing of coalitions. We've seen it in the Philippines, where if you're organized from the ground, ordinary citizens involved in the campaigns, up to international, solidarity of international organizations and allies at the national, allies at the regional, and also trying to push back any resistance. That kind of organizing, which we referring to as vertically integrated advocacy and monitoring, actually enable us to somehow pass very highly contested policies. Those are the big campaigns, and those are the policy institutional reform campaigns. There are also small approaches and efforts that we could do, and GWatch has been doing that for quite a while now, which is with whatever spaces you have in the pockets where there are openings and people are ready to be mobilized and to actually volunteer to do something. The challenge is to really enable them and to give them the kind of tools that they need. And the GWatch approach is providing those simple tools so that any ordinary citizen could check whether the government is providing them the entitlements that they are supposed to be receiving, or whether the government is implementing the programs and projects that in according to standards, because that is also a big area of corruption. So there's billions of pesos lost in procurements, for example, and also in contract implementation. So sa mga buildings, diba? Sa mga infrastructure projects, sa mga textbooks na nawawala, health medicines that are, as we've seen, that get expired. If only the people know what to check and they are informed of the mechanisms to report findings, maybe we could have prevented. So it's more the preventive part of fighting corruption. And we've done several. One example was a textbook count initiative. Textbook count, we initiated this in 2000, year 2000. During that time, the PCIJ came out with a report saying, this huge textbook scam, and ghost deliveries of textbooks. So there are plenty of corruption happening in textbooks. So the idea there is, okay, there's corruption. What can we do about it? Government came on board, and then civil society said, okay, we will mobilize Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. In every school, we would put Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, provide us with information on how many textbooks every school would receive and when would the delivery happen. And the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, because they're present in all schools, got mobilized and checked. And that avoided ghost deliveries. The engagement of civil society at the national level also brought down the prices of procurement, made it faster. So just a simple process of participation of citizens at different levels enabled that kind of complete accountability, or that comprehensive accountability and complete oversight. Because the challenge with other monitoring would be, if you're not able to cover all, you will have this kind of what we refer to as squeezing the balloon, meaning government agency saying, okay, this is not our fault. It's actually the local government's fault. Or you're only looking at one or this case, but this is not the situation in all cases. But if you are able to cover all, I mean, if you say 85% of the textbooks were delivered, you are saying 85% of 100% were delivered, and you have that kind of oversight and authority. But the question is, how do you make that happen? Because so far, in our experience, that kind of accountability, vertically integrated, really coalitional accountability present at all levels, happened only in textbooks. And it only happened in a certain period. How do you make that happen and replicate that? It's still a question and a challenge in our country. There are many factors, such as at that time there was an opening. So because there was a change of administration, everybody was hyped up about corruption, about fighting corruption, and everybody was open. You have a champion in government. You have people, okay, we have to do something about textbooks. So the context was also quite favorable at that time. In this time, where after almost 2 decades, you have the same problems, you basically also hear in the news reports of people getting killed left and right, especially if they say something against government, and we feel that actually on the ground. I don't know if you can mobilize as huge as that for a constructive accountability effort. So that's also a challenge. So there is, as I shared, the democratic dimension of accountability.
Ma'am, these reforms that you have mentioned, will this necessitate a change in the Constitution? Like, for example, in the electoral reforms that you have mentioned, it's very clear about the terms of office, etc.
Yeah.
So how do you see it being reconciled with the idea of constitutional change?
Yes. The reality is, if you broaden your analysis of corruption and what's causing it, the broader reforms would be necessary. And most of our constitution was crafted as a response to martial law, and also it hasn't been amended for for more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades. So this is there are a lot of provisions in the constitution which could need a lot of reflection, and especially in electoral reform. That's one of the questions. So in our work, we've been noting that charter change is really an important element of the reform. The question is, when do you undertake charter change, and how can you successfully undertake it in a way that people are involved? So the biggest mistake, I guess, that could happen is if charter change is undertaken and that we craft the constitution without people's participation, because that's one of the things that we need to really address now. The kind of low ownership of people on political and public processes and collective action. So the best way to do that is to open it up. So choices such as, for example, constituent assembly, where Congress would convene itself into a body that would review the Constitution, wouldn't provide us with that kind of corrective process that would allow more people to take part in the process and build the trust in our public space and processes. So there are right ways of doing the constitutional change, because we probably need to do that as well, given the kind of reforms that we need.
So what are the laws that need to be legislated so that we can really combat these corruption practices in government?
If you look at the laws, we have many laws, we have many policies and many regulations. There could be some amendments needed, for example, on the Government Procurement Reform Act. Some are outdated. One of the things that we also need to acknowledge is that as we try to fight corruption, those who have been benefiting from corruption are also trying to study how they can actually undermine the reforms that you're undertaking. And they are learning very fast and more efficiently, because the incentive is more immediate on their end. So in a way, your enemy is also learning very fast. But on the other hand, those who are fighting corruption are not learning very, very fast. In fact, they do not even think that they should progress and learn about what they're doing. So that's one of the things that GWatch is trying to address. So there are some specific elements of the procurement law that needs to be looked into. But overall, we have laws. The biggest challenge of corruption, the fight against corruption in the Philippines, is really implementations. How do you implement laws, and how do you pass complementary policies, as I mentioned, in electoral reform, institutional reforms, strengthening of accountability mechanisms that are very political, that would require public support, that would require pushback against interests that would be affected. So political leadership would be very crucial.
Political dynasty, maybe?
Yes, especially that's an important element of it, which is in our constitution, an electoral reform that needs to be passed, which would actually affect a lot of those who are occupying positions of power. So that's an important thing. In the immediate, we're looking into because a lot of the reforms that I'm talking about are very much in an ideal world. You have
it's where all right to dream.
where you have a very conducive environment for radical changes in your political and electoral system. But right now, I think starting at local government, there are some good signs. I think there is now a recognition for some local government officials that it's better to govern through transparency, participation, and accountability. The late Secretary Jessie Robredo showed us that if you actually govern with transparency, participation, accountability, you can actually transform a city, a third-class city, into a premier city that has become a model of local good governance. So there are a lot of local government officials who are looking at this, and hopefully, if you while you're still fixing the big picture here at the national level, if ever it gets fixed, you can start building constituencies that would demand, because we need to build constituencies really for this, and huge constituencies that would say that this works. So those kind of demands, right now GWatch is working in several localities, and that's where we really see positive developments and improvements. Another way is looking into existing feedback reporting system. So there are already existing mechanisms for citizen feedback, public reporting. So whether these are working. So make sure that they are working. So for example, one thing that you could say that is a good initiative that also was continued from the previous administration is this 8888, which generates feedback from the people about any irregularities in the government. So one of the things that we're looking at is whether they are working, and make sure the other risk of that we are making sure of is that it's not going to be used again to actually curtail dissent, or make sure that those who report will actually also have protection. So that those kind of efforts, and also specific issues. We have existing mechanisms for participation. There are a lot of that. I've been studying this, and every single time I study one program, I'm amazed. Okay, there is an participatory innovation again in this program, but they are not working. So the challenge is, how do you make all of it work? So just recently, I came from Samal, and I found out in 4Ps, in Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program, which is a huge anti-poverty program, they have all sorts of mechanisms for reporting grievance, redress, feedback, citizen participation. But more than that, they have actually a interagency, multi-sector convening that would allow more sectors to be involved. And those I've seen most reports because I'm doing a study on this, and they haven't figured out yet. So that's another participatory innovation that's not working. How do we make them work? Sangguniang Kabataan. Sangguniang Kabataan is a mechanism that is there. It's present in all barangays. But is it working, or is it creating more problem? I think making existing mechanisms work while we're fixing the big picture would be one way of addressing corruption as well.
All right. So thanks for that, because you've mentioned Sangguniang Kabataan, which brings me to FEU, back to FEU, with all of those beautiful examples that you have cited. How can our students participate in this citizen action in combating corruption? On the personal level, what kind of principles they should adopt so that they will be effective and credible agents of change in the society? I'm sure our students are so fed up with dealing with this corruption in our society, and maybe it's high time also that they realize that they also have to do something with themselves in the same manner that they should also act about the problem that they are confronting as a generation. So what advice can you give to our students?
As students who are in an academic setting, I think broadening their knowledge about corruption would be very important. They have the opportunity to do that here, and helping the country find innovative solutions. I hope more students would actually think about strategies and approaches that we could enable reforms. The other is one thing also that we have as an advocacy in GWatch. We call it Ako, Ikaw, Tayo, May Pananagutan, which is a call for everyone to take up accountability as their advocacy. It doesn't need any other action other than really considering yourself as part of a whole who has responsibility and whose actions would actually affect others. And this kind of ethics in how we conduct ourselves as part of society is very important, because it all boils down to that. These are individual decisions. Yes, the system is a factor, and the system affects individuals. But individuals also has agencies. They need to be able to train that agency to be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. There will always be ethical dilemmas, especially as they assume positions of power and when they actually make decisions as part of society. We all know that we face it on everyday on daily basis. I guess what I would always use as check is whether your actions, consider your actions as something that could be done or could be replicated by everybody. Would that action actually be beneficial to society or not. Because if only you think of your action as just an isolated, atomistic action of someone who's probably not significant, you wouldn't bother doing some not so good things. But if you think that your action as an individual would actually could be something that could set an example and precedent to a lot of people, maybe that's how you could make proper decisions and good decisions. But still, individual actions, ako, ikaw, tayo may pananagutan, would be one, individual action would be one, being mindful of our decisions would be one, but really taking part of collective actions as well. There are a lot of opportunities for participation. One is election. How do we make decisions and how do we participate as citizens in the election is one of the things that every citizen. I used to teach in the other university, and I would a lot of my students eventually became part of non-government organizations, who became part of different advocacies. They would come to me and say, and would give me feedback on what worked in terms of the classes that I held. I think what made a lot of difference was you make them part, you situate them in what's happening in society, make them part of it. Because most of the time, the reason people do not care about their actions and decisions is they probably think that they are not part of any society and they're not linked to any part of society and collective action, especially the collective action. And specific initiatives that are quite just simple but would open up awareness, so fora, etc., or any just discussion series. The youth right now is very privileged because they have they have information communication technology, and all sorts of information is just in their hands automatically. They can get, so they can be informed. So the last, I think, in line with this new positive development is, how do you develop critical thinking as well? Because we've seen it. Fake news, post-truths, all this misinformation, it's rampant. It's actually conditioning how we think, it's conditioning what we will say and what we will do, the choices we will make. So critical thinking is how do we enable critical thinking in our students? How do we enable critical thinking among ourselves? When do we know that it's true or not? There are also a lot of materials that have been developed actually to check different facts, to make sure that you're not sharing any information that are actually perpetuating lies. Because the advantage of technology is it has actually improved dissemination of information. The disadvantage of that, it has also make disinformation, the spreading of disinformation, the spreading of misinformation very efficiently. So a lie could actually become a truth through likes. If there are more likes, even if it's a lie, it could actually be true. So this kind of specific action that especially the millennials, the youth of today, are very, very familiar with, we need to also take it into account and also inform them that this small actions, even just a like or share, would actually have an impact and would make a lot of difference, especially this day and age of information communication technology.
All right, so thank you very much, ma'am, for that. This is a very enlightening discussion, and I think 1 hour is not enough, for you to share with us everything that you know about corruption. But I think you were able to really show to the students how important it is for us to take an active role in combating corruption. So we have discussed quite a number of issues today, and one of the saddest discoveries that I had for today is that corruption is already a norm. But we are not hopeless because our guest here has discussed with us several kinds of reforms, both on the institutional and the personal level that we have to engage in. We have to remember that these are issues of social trust and political maturity, of making sure that we build a strong state, build on justice, on a strong justice and accountability system. And the answer to all of these problems caused by corruption is in the project of G-Watch, which is ako, ikaw, tayong lahat ay may pananagutan. So thank you for watching. Have a good day.